alone.
How pathetic.
Hey, I just wanted to share a quick build showcase / guide of my Reap Inquisitor. So this is a cold conversion crit-based life stacking Inquisitor. It has about 45 to 60 million DPS depending on overlaps. 90% elemental res. It's 100% crit immune, 100% spell suppress cap. Has about 9.3k total life pool, 6.4k regen per second. And it's also using Defiance of Destiny as well as Progenesis for tankiness. As you can see at the beginning of the video, this build can face tank most Uber boss mechanics. It is probably the strongest character that I've ever made, but it is extremely expensive. So that's kind of the disclaimer here. The build can handle pretty much all map mods except for no regen / recovery. And it might have some difficulty with extreme minus max resistance and damage mods. But that being said, it's pretty much capable of handling back-to-back tier 17s. It's great at uber bossing. It can do simulacrum. It's not the fastest mapper, but the clear is pretty decent. And it has great single target due to how Reap works. So just as a quick breakdown of how Reap works, normally when you cast the spell, it just summons one of these little scythes, and it has a big physical hit with a physical dot component attached to it. And the way that we're scaling our damage is we're focused entirely on the hit, so we don't care about the dot at all. But with Awakened Spell Cascade, you get 3 additional scythes when you cast your spell. And you can kind of see here, the first one casts kind of towards the left of my cursor here. And with all 4 of these scythes, as long as you have enough AoE, I'm actually not quite sure what the breakpoint is for the AoE here, but certain enemies have larger hitboxes, so the overlaps happen more frequently, even with less AoE. But basically, in the center here, so just to the right of my cursor, you can see where all 4 sides kind of have a little bit of overlap. All 4 of these can shotgun, so it basically just quadruples your DPS when you're attacking. It's pretty great. So there's a little bit of skill to using this. You kind of want to cast a little bit behind your target to try and get the most overlaps, and it's a pretty neat little interaction. But anyways, let's kind of run through how we're scaling our damage with this character. So Reap is, it's kind of funny, you can't even see the tooltip entirely here, but Reap is a physical spell, and we're scaling our damage by scaling gem level as much as we can. So we have a Empower here, and then you can kind of see here we're using a really like a pseudo 8 link helmet, I don't even know what to call this, to put our Reap in. And then on top of that, we're converting our damage into cold. So we do this through a pair of gloves with the perfect physical damage converted to cold implicit, with crafted cold damage conversion. And then we also run a Watcher's Eye that has as much physical damage converted to cold while affected by hatred. This goes up to 40%, but after divining this a million times, I just settled at 39%. But yeah, so we're converting all of our damage into cold, or at least most of it. And then we're also scaling damage through hatred effect. So you can see here I have hatred aura effect on my chest. I have hatred somewhere here with a inspiration and divine blessing. So you can see here my hatred, I just have to manually cast it, but I have some unreserved mana, and this is entirely to get a bunch of additional aura effect on Hatred through Divine Blessing. And that basically results in a super juice Hatred aura, and Hatred gives you an obscene amount of damage when you're converting into cold. So it's by far the best aura. It gives us a lot of damage. And then I think the last thing that we're doing that really gives us a crazy amount of damage is we're also using Rathpith Globe. So that's kind of where the life stacking comes into play here. So Rathpith basically has the downside of your spells start to cost life every time you cast. So 10% life is actually quite a lot when you're spam casting. You can kind of see my health goes down a lot while I'm spam casting here. But we counteract this because we're an Inquisitor. We stack a ton of life regen. And then we also evenly spread our damage through the Keystone Corrupted Soul. So when we actually get hit, we're also regenerating energy shield and life. The damage gets spread a little more evenly. And that's through Glorious Vanity with the Doriani sacrifice. But Rathpith also gives us a ton of spell crit. So this helps us cap our spell crit. And then it also gives us a lot of damage. So the more life we have, the more benefit we get from Rathpith, and we just have to make sure we have enough regen to counteract the negative here. That's basically the core setup of the build. So I'll jump into the gear pieces and kind of break down my reasoning. So to start off, we have a generic +2 Sceptre with cast speed, crit multi, and some spell damage. We go with the non-chaos damage as extra chaos, since it's a bit more DPS. This is just a graveyard craft, but scaling gem levels and crit multi and cast speed is essentially the best way that we can scale our damage. As I mentioned before, we have a double influence, multiple fractured graveyard helmet. I don't have a graveyard layout for this, but this is very similar to the one that people are using for the cast and crit detonate dead build. I went ahead and just bought this. I didn't make it myself, but it isn't too difficult to craft. It's just a little bit of RNG, so it can take you a few tries. We went with the Phys damage from hits taken as fire so that we could tank larger physical hits. That's probably the biggest weakness of this character. Even though we're able to tank Uber Shaper Slam and things like that, we're relying pretty heavily on having a large life pool to do that. I have a Defiance of Destiny, as I mentioned before. This is a double corrupted one that I got for a very low price. I wasn't even looking for this, but the Zealotry aura effect is really nice, so I went ahead and just bought it. Definitely not necessary, but it is a little bit of extra free damage, so it was nice to find. Our Anoint is also Golem's Blood. So we don't really path towards the bottom of the tree, and this node is actually really great. It gives you a ton of life and a ton of life regen, so it's kind of our best Anoint when you think about how we're scaling our defenses. I have a double corrupted Rathpith. You can definitely get a better one than this, but the reduce extra damage from crits is really nice since we can tattoo the remaining crit reduction that we need, and then also run the reduce extra damage from crits armor mastery. So basically with this shield and this armor mastery, we just need to run 9 tattoos. So I have a bunch of them on the tree, and that's actually how we're getting crit immune. The ring is a Vermilion ring since we're scaling life. This is actually not anything too crazy. The Essence Fracture is pretty expensive, but it's just life with Essence crit multi and then a resist to help us cap our resists. And then we're running +1 minimum frenzy charges since we actually have no way of generating frenzy charges on bosses. You could technically run Blood Rage, but I didn't want to do that. So we just accept that we get 2 frenzy charges instead of 3. It's not really the biggest deal. And we're just Kalandra's touching this ring since it's cheaper than trying to make a second one. For our chests, we are running a generic double fracture graveyard. This is actually probably the worst item that I'm wearing, but it's just chaos res, physical damage reduction, tier 1 spell suppress, and then Phys taken as fire and lightning. I did put the harvest enchant for resist on here since we don't really care about the armor that much. And we are also getting +2 maximum fire res here, which is important because I am using Melding of the Flesh. So you might see that I have a Ruby Flask here, I have my melding is right here. So resists are pretty difficult for this build since we're running melding, but it's how we're getting 90 all res. So I mentioned that I have a Glorious Vanity on. This Glorious Vanity is actually giving us +2 max fire res here. So it's actually pretty amazing. And with that +2 max fire res, we're running Purity of Fire, Ruby Flask, got the +2 max fire res here, +1 max fire res here, and then there's another point of +1 max fire res on the tree, I think, that we have, and that's getting us to 90% all res, as you can see right here. You could definitely craft something better than this. I mean, ideally, this just has perfect prefixes, so you get a couple thousand armor and evasion, which is just nice to have, but again, not really a big deal. I just didn't even feel like trying to craft something better since this works for me. We're running a fractured life regen pair of gloves. So since we're stacking life regen, increased life regeneration rate is going to give us a lot of regen basically for free. This just has chaos res, spell suppress, and then as I mentioned before, we're using these gloves to convert most of our physical damage to cold. This is pretty easy to craft actually. So one of the cheaper pieces, you could try to Veiled Orb and get a like +2 AoE gems or something and run some auras in here instead, but I wasn't willing to spend the 15 divines per try, but you can definitely get something slightly better. And we're also getting a nerve here. So normally you would need to get some form of leech on your gloves. So instead of unnerve, you might run cold damage leeches life since we're converting to cold. But I'm also actually getting this from my Glorious Vanity as well. So this is a really perfect Glorious Vanity. We get the +2 max fire res, and then we're getting cold damage leeches life. So it also solves our leech. I'm wearing a Mageblood, nothing special here. This is probably the best belt that you can wear for this build. You can make a non-Mageblood version and try and go like Headhunter since it's a Phys spell and just like make a crazy fast mapper, but yeah, just using Mageblood. For our boots, this is kind of crafted on accident, but it's double fractured graveyard. Life regen rate, as I mentioned before, and then we managed to hit tier 1 spell suppress even though we were going for a life fracture. This is just essence crafted tier 0 life with a resist, and then you could technically Ashling Slam this, Veiled Orbit, but I just crafted movement speed and called it a day. We're also getting life regen rate as one of the implicits, and we're getting +1 maximum fire res as the other. You could technically get +2 maximum fire res if you want to Orb of Conflict it, but I didn't need it, so that's just why I settled on that. So those are the main gear slots. Let me run over the flasks real fast. So we're using Progenesis. This is just one of the best flasks to increase our effective health. And since we're a regen based build, like we're regenning like almost our entire life bar every second. The negative part of Progenesis doesn't really impact us at all. We're running a Quartz Flask with additional elemental res, since capping our res is really hard with melding, so this kind of helps solve that and helps us reach suppress cap. We're using a Ruby Flask with life regen per second. Again, we like life regen. This is just a pretty simple, easy craft. We're using a Silver Flask for Onslaught, and then this also gives us a full elemental ailment avoidance. So we are also running a Stormshroud, I believe right here. So with this flask plus Mageblood plus Stormshroud is the easiest way to reach full elemental ailment immune. And then we're just running a generic Quicksilver with some cast speed on it. So pretty straightforward flasks. We do have a Reflect flask. So when we're running Reflect maps, we run this flask plus, this doesn't give you full immunity as far as I know. So I usually just grab this extra Pantheon here. I'm not even really sure if it helps, but I think if you're taking increased damage taken, this flask won't fully protect you from Reflect. So that's just something to keep in mind. But yeah, we just swapped this flask out. That's how we solve Reflect. It's not super optimal, but it is really easy. So let's run over the skill gems real quick. So I mentioned before, we've got Reap with increased area of effect, hypothermia, extra crit, and conk effect plus essence of horror in our helmet. This is super expensive, but it's very worth it since it frees up a lot of gem links for our build. We're just running Empower with that, Awaken Spell Cascade, and Awaken Spell Echo. Awaken Spell Echo is actually super expensive, and you could actually just run Awakened Added Fire instead, since it gives you +1 skill gems, and it's probably about 10 to 15% less damage, but it costs nowhere near as much. So we have Hatred with Inspiration and Divine Blessing. Basically every 15 seconds or so, we just have to press our Hatred aura. This gives us a ton of damage. We have Shield Charge, faster attacks, and then Righteous Fire. So we're also casting Righteous Fire and just leaving that on for the free damage. In our chests, we do have a little bit of mana issues with our current setup. So you could try to get some minus mana cost somewhere, or like mana reduction, but it costs our entire mana bar to cast our Hatred. So we have just enough mana to use our Divine Blessing. To help mitigate some issues that this causes and like general clunkiness, we are running Frost Shield, Assassin's Mark, Frost Blink, Call to Arms, and Enduring Cry all linked together with Life Tap. So the only thing that costs mana in our build is our Shield Charge, which we easily regen. So it's really not any issues, despite having the full mana cost on our Hatred here. Other auras that we're running Vitality with Arrogance. So this just gives us a bunch of regen, even though it does take a little bit of life. We're running Immortal Call on cast when damage taken. So we usually have a couple of endurance charges when we're mapping and while we're bossing. So the Immortal Call does get a little bit of value, but other than that, there's really not a good guard skill that we could use. Like maybe you could use Steel Skin, but I typically prefer Immortal Call when we're running Enduring Cry. And then for our auras, we're running in our boots, we're running an Enlightened 4 with Zealotry, Herald of Ash, and Purity of Fire. You could actually use a Herald of Purity instead of Herald of Ash. It's technically more damage. The reason that I don't, though, is because on a lot of tier 17s, Herald of Purity can kind of grief you and make you take more damage with the damage per ally mod. On certain bosses, Herald of Purity is also annoying, like on Exarch. I mean, I can tank all the Exarch balls, but it does like trigger them. So I just prefer Herald of Ash, but it's really personal preference. Yeah, that's basically everything. So let me just run through the skill tree. This tree is a pretty generic Inquisitor tree. Sometimes you might path like all the way up to the top right, which is what I did early on in this character, but eventually you want to switch over to a couple of cluster jewels since they're the pretty much highest value that you can get on this kind of build. But let's see. I'm running in a Natural Instinct here, so you can see this jewel slot just kind of gives you a lot of value with a Natural Instinct. I'm running the Adorned, and then I path over here and make sure I grab the Spell Suppress Mastery. So you might have noticed that all of my armor pieces have evasion. That's entirely so that I can get this. Otherwise, if you don't care about spell suppress, you could just wear armor bases, I guess. But this is part of how we're able to get the spell suppress cap, even though we don't really have any other spell suppress nodes anywhere else. And then we're running 2 tattoos here to kind of fill in the last few percent. A lot of our strength nodes we also convert over to life regen, since we get a lot of value out of that. And then we have this random mana node because without it, we actually can't cast our Divine Blessing. So if I can figure out a way to drop that, I could get another point over here on one of my clusters. We have Glorious Vanity over here. And then we're basically picking up all of the life mastery. So you might notice we're just pathing to each of the life wheels and making sure that we get the masteries. So we have kind of all of these and then even these ones down here. This just gives us a lot of extra life, which with Defiance of Destiny is kind of how we're able to just become immortal to anything that doesn't do an obscene amount of damage to us. This is where our melding is. We also pick up as many jewel stunts as we can. So we're running a bunch of random crit multi and max life adorned jewels. We get one up here that has CB immunity on it. We have this really awesome Watcher's Eye that gives us life recovery and some Phys conversion as well as cold conversion. We have a large cluster here. So basically what you want to do is try and fracture either attack and cast speed with physical skills or increased effect. And then we're just looking to roll life plus either all attributes or resistances, and then you can kind of fill in the rest based on what your character needs. And then we kind of just put all the points into this since we get a lot of value out of it. Let's see. We have all of these crit reduction tattoos. We also convert this one dex node into cold res to help with the resistances. We have a intelligence adorn jewel since this is kind of necessary. It looks really weird, but this is how we're able to run so many intelligence conversion tattoos to get our crit reduction, since otherwise our intelligence would be like a little bit too low and we wouldn't really benefit from the Inquisitor ascendancy, since we get a bunch of free crit chance as long as we have a couple hundred strength and int. And also this ascendancy, this is pretty standard. I think pretty much every Inquisitor is following some similar version of this, but we take Pious Path so that we get the free life regen on our energy shield as well. And then we're just taking the ignore elemental resistances on crit, and we pretty much have 100% crit. So we have another cluster here. I didn't roll the cast speed mod on this, but I did hit all attributes and chaos res, so I decided to keep it. I guess technically I could divine this to get a little bit of extra life. I may as well, since the character is so expensive. But again, we just throw in a couple of adorn jewels where we can, and yeah, we also pick up some of the life regen that you can see here, and that's basically it. It's just a pretty standard Inquisitor tree, nothing too fancy. We just get a little bit of extra life nodes, and yeah. Also for the Pantheon, we are running Soul of the Brine King. This is actually just so that we have some form of stun immunity. We have a large life pool, so we don't normally get stunned, but in some tier 17s, if you're not running this, you can get chain stunned, and that feels really bad. So we wear this for mapping, even though that's the only benefit we're getting. And then we run Solaris for bossing. So on bosses like Cyrus and Uber Shaper, Solaris is kind of a crazy amount of value. It definitely helps you. It gives you a lot of character power for how little the investment is, and it's also part of how we're able to tank things like Shaper Slam. And then for our minor Pantheon, we switch this around a lot actually. So if we're running like a crazy poison map, I have this one on. I don't even have these upgraded. As I mentioned before, this is the reflect one that you can pick up. And then usually for bosses, I'm running Tukohama. So you just stand still, you get a bunch of Phys reduction, you get a bunch of life regen. And then in combination with Solaris, you can kind of just stand there and face tank slams and stuff. I'm pretty sure I can tank Uber Shaper Slam even without Progenesis up at this point. But yeah, that's basically the full overview. And then, yeah, the mapping playstyle it's pretty comfortable. You just cast your Divine Blessing Hatred, you cast your Reap, you kind of just run and cast like kind of off screen a bit. And then for tanky rares, we just manually cast Assassin's Mark, and you can see we have crazy fast cast speed, so it really doesn't feel bad at all. And then we just constantly cast Frost Shield since this gives us a lot of free health. And you can see we don't even really lose any energy shield because our regen's so high when we're casting it. So anytime we're fighting a boss or anything tanky, we just drop this, or if we're worried about taking a bunch of damage. And yeah, it's pretty straightforward. We have a really fast shield charge and Frost Blink, and occasionally you'll cast Veil Reap. So Veil Reap gives you a bunch of extra blood charges, which increases our damage significantly. Does have the drawback of making our spells cost a lot more life, but on things that are super tanky or when we're fighting a boss, you just cast the Veil Reap anywhere, and then you have max blood charges at 9, I believe it is, and then you just have crazy DPS while that's up. But besides that, this is a pretty smooth character. There's not really a lot of buttons. Like I typically just have to press Hatred for each map, and if you don't like doing that, you don't have to run this Divine Blessing setup. You can probably just reserve the aura. You just get a lot less damage and a lot less aura effect. that's about it for the character. I will leave a link to the POB in the description, as well as a tier 17 map regex. For the rest of the video, I will actually just show one of my tier 17 maps so you can kind of get an idea of how the build plays in maps. But hopefully this was helpful. And if you have any questions or comments, suggestions, if I missed anything important, feel free to leave that down below. But thank you guys for watching, and see you next time.
Death will never come.